This is the Transforming Anxiety podcast with Kelly Hanlon McCormick, and today is episode number 207, Life Enhancing Anxiety with Dr. Kirk Schneider. Welcome to Transforming Anxiety. I'm your host, Kelly McCormick. I'm a mom to 2 boys, a wife, friend, daughter, and sister, and I'm a certified life coach, yoga teacher, and soon-to-be mindfulness meditation teacher. I'm no stranger to anxiety, and I'm here to teach you how to manage your mind and your emotions so that you too can transform anxiety into calm, peace, and whatever you want for your life. I'm so glad you're here. All right, welcome. I'm so excited to be bringing another interview onto the show, another author, another psychologist onto the show this week to introduce you to just another way of thinking about anxiety. Actually, let me talk about Dr. Schneider here for a second, and then we're going to get into the interview where we talk in depth about his brand new book called Life Enhancing Anxiety. Dr. Kirk Schneider is a psychologist and psychotherapist who has taken a leading role in the advancement of existential humanistic therapy and existential integrative therapy. Schneider is also the current editor of the Journal of Humanistic Psychology. He has a few major books that have already been published: Existential Humanistic Therapy, Existential Integrative Therapy, The Handbook of Humanistic Psychology, The Psychology of Existence, Rediscovery of Awe, Awakening to Awe, and his brand new book out earlier this month, February of 2023, which is called Life Enhancing Anxiety, subtitle, The Key to a Sane World. I think you're going to find this interview really interesting. We talk a little bit about his background. We talk about the difference between life enhancing anxiety, which I think is such a cool way to think about anxiety, such a different way for us to think about and approach anxiety versus what he calls life denying anxiety, which I think is how most of us would say we relate to anxiety, right? It's like this denial of life, of expansion, of growth, of progress, of just anything affirming, right, about the quality of our life. So his book is out, like I said, as of this month, February of 2023, and we have a really interesting conversation about all different aspects of life-enhancing anxiety. So I hope you enjoy our conversation. Here is Dr. Kirk Schneider. All right. So welcome to the Transforming Anxiety community, Dr. Kirk Schneider. I'm so glad to have you here.
Thanks so much, Kelly.
This is going to be a really interesting conversation. I'm excited. Dr. Schneider has a book coming out, Life Enhancing Anxiety, subtitle, Key to a Sane World. I'm always interested to start reading the book because the subtitle becomes relevant and obvious so quickly. And that's Key to a Sane World was very evident as soon as I started reading. So I appreciated that. His book comes out on February 1st. We'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. But I thought we would start, kind of introduce people to your work and what you're up to these days. But I thought we would start by touching on your personal experience with anxiety. My audience is very well aware of my personal experience. But if you would share a little bit of your story.
Sure. Well, I had my very brute introduction to anxiety at about two and a half years old, when my 7-year-old brother died of a series of diseases that my parents did everything to stop and to heal, but just to no avail. And this was back in the late 50s. And the explosion of that event in our family system was as you might imagine, huge. The difference before he died and then afterward, it was just devastating to my mother and my father. Uh, my mother, I think, was most overwhelmed by it, and she actually had to leave the family for periods of time. And I was left with my grandmother during some pretty extended periods. And the change in them was, I think, understandably extreme also. And just as, being greeted with smiling faces or upbeat mentality to this sudden, abrupt despair and just a kind of a dark cloud, a very dark cloud over the family. And I was only 2.5 at the time. So that is a time of extreme vulnerability and unknowing, obviously, with very little experience of life. And I was floundering. I had a very, very rough time for several years after that, actually. But soon after the death, I went into a tailspin, went on crying jags for periods of time, expressed a lot of rage, and I was terrified of death and dying, of illness. I had fears, fantasies of monsters attacking me. I remember looking out my window at night and fearing that there were witches coming, into the window, through the window. It's hard for me to describe in words the kind of free fall that I was in. It was like it was hard to find any support, anything to hold on to. And I know my parents did the absolute best they could. I know this even more in retrospect. I can't imagine what that would be like for young parents. They were in their 20s to lose a child.
Sure.
But anyway, I was left very much adrift, but my parents were also very psychologically minded. My father was a humanistic educator. He was a math and science teacher, and later he became a professor of education. But he was a big believer in humanistic psychology. And so I almost grew up with figures like Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers. Their books were around me, and Rollo May, who I got to know later in life, and was a tremendous influence on my career, my profession. And that helped a lot. He was very psychologically minded. He actually took notes on me when I was going through so much, I think, to help me in any way he could. And my mother, she was a radio and television spokesperson, which was unusual for a woman in 1960 or so. Extremely admirable person, and also, but very psychologically minded too. She was one of the few people, I'm sure, in our community, we're in a kind of middle class, working class neighborhood, to see a psychoanalyst right after my brother died. So she was also very psychologically minded, and she referred me to a child analyst when I was about 6 years old. And I actually describe my experience with him, beginning experience with him in the book, as you probably know,
Yeah.
in the appendix. It took a bit of, I don't know, I guess, courage to put that out there. But I had preserved the psychiatric notes of my psychoanalyst from 30 years ago, because I visited him when I was in my 30s. And he was kind enough to not only look for the notes, but actually find them, and he typed them up and sent them to me and said I could use them any way I wanted. I was writing something at the time. And I think that experience with him was probably life-saving in a lot of ways, because he was a figure in my life who was just rock solid. That's what I remember. I don't remember a thing that we talked about, and I don't think we did play therapy, but I remember that he was just powerfully present and could hold all that I was going through, stay with my fears, and be as reassuring as possible and as supportive as possible through that experience. And he also helped me to ask questions about what I was going through and what the reality of the situation was. So he helped to ground me in the reality that I was surviving and my parents were surviving, and one could survive. And I had the sense that he had been through a lot himself. He seemed very seasoned. So he was a great model in that sense.
Yeah.
And that really was my beginning. It's the way I would summarize it is a sense of groundlessness and helplessness after my brother died. And I think these are very deep primal existential experiences for people who suffer any great trauma. And I do think it harks back to the point of birth, that it's something that we all experience when we're ejected from the womb. I don't think it's all trauma necessarily. I do think it's mixed with elements of wonder. But I do think a big part of it is extremely stressful and helpless. And it forms the template for our anxieties later on, or, as I say, great shocks, great losses later on, where we're taken back to that place of, basically moving from a place of relative stability and unity, with our parents or with our family culture, to sudden abrupt disunity.
Yeah.
And lostness, pandemonium, really.
Right.
Without preparation, especially when one is very young.
Right.
So I feel like a lot of my life has been devoted to reworking that basic trauma, and to learning about the different sides of anxiety. I mean, that's a particularly crippling side, but as I've grown through the years, and especially more recently, I realize, at least for my own life and for many people that I've known, that the more that one can be present to those primal terrors, that primal sense of groundlessness and helplessness, the more one can see that those are also opportunities, and they're openings as much as they're closings, because they're sort of tearing the fabric of the routine and familiar open
Yes.
into something new, into something possible. It's a chance for discovery, for wonder. And thankfully, I was able to come around to that place to a great extent from that early analysis that I had with that psychiatrist. I think he helped me get to a place where I could begin to be a little curious about my anxiety, curious about death and dying, curious about the radically unknown, which is really what anxiety is about.
Yes.
Terror of the unknown. And as I became curious, I actually started becoming more and more interested in science fiction as a kid. I had my own characters, actors, through toys that I had, whether toy soldiers or figures. I'd put them together in plays, and anyway, I was fascinated by television programs like The Outer Limits and Twilight Zone. And these were great creative takes on anxiety, really, because they introduced you to strange beings, unusual circumstances, people and things that were out of the box, so to speak, and yet made them fascinating in a way, and kind of sparked one's curiosity about such strange and unfamiliar creatures or people or ways of thinking.
Right.
I was very caught up in that. Yeah. So that started me off in seeing the various sides of anxiety.
You've hit on something, and you've used quite a few words here to describe it: fascination and curiosity and wonder.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in our culture, in our society, a less skilled approach to anxiety is often one of avoidance and resistance and like numbness almost. How can I numb out? How can I escape?
Absolutely.
You have you have a whole chapter dedicated to this. It's called From Anxiety to Awe, which I thought was such a great concept, because there is this, if we could flip from the resistance towards the wonder, towards the curiosity. And in the world of mindfulness, we talk a lot about approaching things with a sense of curiosity and even friendliness.
Yes.
Right? Like drop the judgment and just kind of with a sense of benevolence and generosity. It's like, what's happening here?
Yes.
Right?
Right.
And is it okay if I read you to you?
Sure.
This is a great quote. A great quote from that chapter, From Anxiety to Awe. You said, and this really hits on what you were talking about with this analyst as a kid. You say, what I'm seeing today throughout our culture is an increasing tendency to skip over the grappling part of the equation and to shift abruptly to the transformational part. Yeah. Right. And then to skip ahead just a little bit, you go on to say, today it is all too easy to bypass the effort to attain freedom, experiential reflection, and responsibility, not responsibility, but our ability to respond. Right. Yeah. Such grappling with who we are and who we are willing to be. Today, we are seduced by an avalanche of devices, formulations, and machine meditated transactions, making it all too tempting to let others, including mechanical others, do the job. Yeah.
Well, I think that pretty much summarizes our growing edge, so to speak, in society.
Yeah.
Maybe not growing in the best directions all the time. Yeah, I mean, for me, much of our society is focused on speed, instant results, and appearance and packaging. And this goes along with our whole socioeconomic model, right?
It does.
Quick, instant results, quick fix models.
Yeah.
And when we have the technology more and more to promote that, or at least the illusion of having these, quick fixes, whether that's through texting or, meeting people through cell phones or through drugs, through vicariously through programs, whether television, video, etc., and through, unfortunately, in many cases, our political leaders who hold themselves out as, godlike figures who are going to save us, is in a really dramatic and quick way, and I think we lose touch with the great value of slowing down,
Yes.
of reflecting. I mean,
Yes.
you're a meditator, so you're very attuned to this. I have my own ways of meditating as well, more of walking meditation. But this sensibility of awe is really, really key for me, really central, and it's key to this whole idea of life-enhancing anxiety. I should define the life-enhancing anxiety.
Yes.
I define it as enabling us to live with and make the best of the depth and mystery of existence.
Yeah.
It supports us in basically being more present to and coexisting with, but not only coexisting with the depth and mystery of existence, but actually learning to thrive in it, to enjoy it, to venture into it, to bring that curiosity to each moment as much as we can.
Yeah.
Seeing each moment as a window to something more than we often grant it, and more often we get so identified with these very kind of petty and narrow spaces, and self-condemning, often self-judging, criticizing others, and lacking that creative play that having more presence to the many sides of anxiety can bring. So I also define it as that invigorating anxiety.
Yes.
That not only acknowledges apprehension and constraint that anxiety can bring, of course, but also the elements of wonder and discovery.
Yes.
That's what we often miss in societies like ours that are hell-bent on eradicating anxiety at all costs. And so part of my thesis in the book is that we're paying a huge price for our quick fix, instant result model of living.
Right.
And not even realizing it because it's so seductive too.
Right.
It seems, why? I mean, it's great to have these instant answers, right? And conveniences all around us at one level. But then I think we also see symptomatically the skyrocketing depression rates, anxiety, addiction, obsession, compulsion, bigotry, racism, violence, war. I mean, you name it.
Right.
We are not in great shape.
Right.
Well-being wise.
Well, it sounds to me like one of the biggest gifts of working with, and maybe it was particular to the psychiatrist that you worked with as a child, to that individual, but one of the best gifts that you were given was this emphasis on like the long-term
future vision of, hey, we're going to get you past this. This isn't going to be a problem forever. And I'm just going to hold that vision for you. And to what you said in the book about that grappling, he made some space for you to just
Yes,
deal with it, to really
that's right.
struggle.
Yes, he did. That's exactly right. Whereas today, I probably would have been bombarded with drugs right
Yes.
away. I wouldn't even had the chance or the luxury, really,
Yes.
to take time to sit with the uncertainty, to sit with the fear, the terror, and the rage, and the sorrow.
Yeah.
Because all of these so-called dysphoric or negative emotions are paradoxical. I think we realize that the more we can be present to these emotions, that fear and anxiety can sometimes, if we stay with them, can tune us into the humility of living.
Yes.
Because we realize that we can't do everything at once. We got to get out of our own way sometimes and acknowledge that we are vulnerable, and that vulnerability actually can open us to new insights and new ways of being with others and with ourselves that we couldn't see before.
Yeah.
Anger can be certainly destructive, but it can also be a way of standing up for oneself, for dignifying oneself, for realizing one has to change one's life to live more of the kind of life that they want to live.
Right.
Sorrow, sadness can sensitize us to life, make us realize the preciousness of each moment, because we know how deeply we're affected by great loss, and it can help intensify the need to really engage our lives.
Yeah.
Because lives really are, a flicker of light between two voids, as it's been put before.
Right.
So my point being that cultivating greater presence is another way to talk about cultivating the ability to see the more in one's struggle, whatever that is.
Oh, I like that.
That there's a more. William James, the great psychologist, talked about the more of consciousness.
Yeah.
I think that is one of the central ideas of great depth psychotherapy, or maybe meditation too. That it helps one, through staying with the evolving nature of the struggle, one can begin to see some other sides to it. So let's say in my therapy, by staying with the deep pains, I might have moments of realizing that this is interesting somehow. What is death? What is life? How am I living? And I especially came to these kinds of insights as I got older. Probably had glimmers of them when I was young, watching those science fiction shows.
Sure.
But I had another great existential analysis when I was in graduate school, and that was very similar. In the sense that it was all about presence and staying with the acute anxiety and panic attacks that I had at that time. I think some recent events at that time reactivated my very early trauma. In any case, being supported to stay with the panic and fear helped me to move gradually from a place of abject terror and paralysis in a lot of ways to gradual, incremental intrigue, curiosity, and even fascination
Yes.
with, okay, so where am I going? What is this about? How do I make meaning of my life? Can I begin to risk being supported to take some risks?
Mhm.
Maybe certainly just in expressing my deepest vulnerability with someone else. That's
Mm.
already a risk. And I'm surviving, right? I didn't
Yes.
fall apart. I didn't get overwhelmed. I mean, I'm sure I had moments of that, but
Well, it's
came back.
moving through the discomfort of it,
Exactly.
recognizing that and that's the grappling, right? Of
That's
I,
it.
I can be with this and I don't have to
Exactly.
enjoy it. It can be uncomfortable
Yeah,
and I can come out the other side.
that's right. And I've got a witness, Alice Miller, the analyst, calls it a helpful witness, whether that's a therapist or it could be a friend, a teacher, a neighbor sometimes. Those can be very potent moments with somebody who seems to have gone through something similar that you've gone through. It doesn't have to be the same thing by any means, but
Mhm.
just the point being that they are able to hold a lot of the kinds of struggle or struggle in their own way that you're going through. And lo and behold, they've survived. And not only
Right.
survived, they've thrived.
They thrive.
They've become healers, or they're active in their careers, or they're creative, or
Yes.
they have engaging relationships with people. Those are great models for people going through very painful, you know, disorienting times.
Yeah.
That whole idea of being with the other and
Yes.
providing that sacred space, if you will. I
Right.
mean, this has even been tried, and I think quite successfully, although it's not advertised nearly enough because of our drug-oriented culture, but it has been quite successful even with some psychotic individuals. The emphasis of staff members on being with that person, helping them work through the struggles and the anxieties to the
Yeah.
place where they feel more stable. R.D. Laing, the psychiatrist from the 60s and 70s, began these safe houses,
Mm.
which continue in some parts of the country. They're called Soteria House later on through Lauren Mosher, who was a psychiatrist in this country. Anyway, they've done follow-up studies with these folks, and they've actually done better on recidivism, returning, having to return to psychiatric wards. They've done better than conventional psychiatric patients on that count, as well as independent living. They've done better with independent living after they've gone through these 5-month or so experiences of being enabled to stay with, work with, acknowledge the difficulties and the estrangements that
Right.
they experience. I mean, half their anxiety, I think, is because people don't accept their unusual behavior. Our
Right.
culture
There's
doesn't.
this, I mean, what we're all dealing with internally with ourselves, right? These emotions that come up that are intense, that are negative, that we don't like, that we kind of have this predisposition of, oh, something's gone wrong here. I shouldn't be feeling this way.
Yeah, that's
Right.
right.
We're on this relentless pursuit to happiness. And then to take someone, whether that's an experience of like chronic anxiety, where they're still maybe functioning in life, but people kind of know, we kind of have to walk on eggshells with that one,
Yeah,
to a more severe psychosis where then we start treating the entire person as if they're bad, they're wrong.
On top of everything.
Yes.
Yeah,
And if we
compounds.
could be with,
Yes.
right? So
Yeah.
whether it's those individual emotions or moments or experiences for ourselves, even to a sense of whether this plays out in a larger like mood, personality, mental health disease,
Mhm.
that it's this sense of being with. And I joke with my people all the time. I get that it's kind of a hard sell in the
Yes.
world of quick fixes and
Yeah.
immediate gratification, where people are like, but I could just buy something on Amazon or right, drink a glass of wine. And I get it, because I've been there. We've all done that dance. And you talked about that too,
For
of
sure. Oh,
we
yeah.
we all want to reach for that.
Yeah.
And it kind of works. I
Yeah.
mean, in the
Yeah.
moment, that's
Well,
why I do it.
And actually, I think many of us or most of us need some breaks from it too.
Of
You know,
course. Good point.
sometimes we're watching a good flick or something, or
Sure.
playing sports or whatever. Yeah. Yeah.
But being able to skillfully titrate in and out as a means of maybe like a healthful distraction versus outright avoidance.
Exactly. Versus making that the be all and end all of
Yes.
one's existence.
Yes. It's okay to
Instead of-
titrate out if it's become too much, if it's become too intense, if you need a break, but to know that the invitation and really the requirement to titrate back in and to feel and to explore again that sense of curiosity and wonder and fascination with it pretty much is always going to be there.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is an ongoing dance, right? Forever. I know
Yeah.
I sometimes get a little smug. I don't know if this happens with you, where I'm like, oh, I'm good now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You do that too.
I have
Like-
those moments. Sure. Sure.
Like
I
that's
wanna think
done, right? I'm okay now. And of course, my mind, my body will remind me we're never done.
Well, we're never done too, because we are suspended on a little ball that's hurtling through the universe at 1.2 million miles per hour to a destination completely unknown, from an origin completely unknown. And I mean, if we look frankly and starkly at our condition, we are continually in suspense. And so the big question for us is, how do we make the best of that great mystery? And sometimes we get little windows into that suspense, which are uncomfortable or sometimes really scary.
Mhm.
But again, if we can shift our way of seeing it, because we feel a greater capacity to hold the uncertainty and the anxiety that comes up, we can begin to see, hey, we're participating in something much greater than ourselves.
Yes.
And that is the beginning of cultivating a sense of awe toward living, what I call the humility and wonder, or sense of adventure toward living, where you're not only just tolerating it, you're actually playing it to some degree. You're tasting it, touching it, participating in something much greater than ourselves, which can be one of the greatest feelings that we can have.
Absolutely.
That's spirituality to me.
Yes. Yes. So there's this sense too, I wanted to hit on. I talk a lot about familiarity versus comfort. And what I think we call our comfort zone is really just our familiarity zone. A lot of times,
that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
right? That it's here's what we know, here's what's predictable for us, even in its total discomfort, really.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times
That's
what
right.
we're doing in life is trying to actually get to a comfort zone, right? We're trying to grow and expand towards something that we recognize would be maybe better or more optimal for us.
Right.
We're kind of stuck in this familiarity zone, and you
Even if
talk
it's
about it,
miserable.
right? The tyranny of sameness, which I loved
Yeah.
that phrase.
Yeah.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about that, the tyranny of sameness?
Well,
This is like
again,
individual and collective.
Yeah, exactly. It's that very primal drive to um, avoid the uncertain, to avoid that sense of helplessness and groundlessness I was talking about. That's so primal. That's so inherent to the way all of us have been, thrown into the world
Yeah.
without any equipment. It's it's
Right.
it's it's an understandable, unsettlement, uh, and if that's not handled very quickly by the parents, by the caretakers, and by the culture, if it's not handled well, that sense of groundlessness and helplessness, and we're not supported to be able to be more present to that which is radically other, right? And that's the beginning of coming into difference. What
Yes.
Otto Rank, the psychologist, calls the psychology of difference, begins at birth. And if we're not supported to take a more discovery-oriented approach toward that which is radically different, and all those threats, all those, well, those differences, I should say, that we come into as small children, if we're getting a lot of fear-based attitudes toward those differences from the culture, from the caretakers, then we are going to we're going to be terrified by
Yes.
that which is other, whether it's person, places, or things,
Yes.
that which is different. So that is going to press us on a path toward wanting to level everything, wanting to make things the same, familiar, routine. The same clothes, the same routine when we get up, the same kinds of interactions that we have, let's say, with our parents when we're young, our friends, even in the culture, there's the same places you go to, or the culture encouraging basically the same kinds of lifestyles. So a lot of conformity that's encouraged. I mean, sometimes they make it look like it's, different and exciting, but that can be very cosmetic.
Yes.
Basically, it's rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic.
Right.
It's making everything look pretty.
Yes.
And, it keeps things looking good on the surface. But underneath, one is maybe really not dealing with what's going on, or the bigger questions, the deeper questions, which are going to be a little uncomfortable. The deeper conversations with people, and I talk about this cross-culturally as well. That we want to. Well, this was the idea of the ugly American, right? Who could go overseas and impose their own views on the French and on the Italian and Japanese, Chinese, whatever. And it's probably the ugly any nationality that is coming with their own prism and going to impose that on the culture that they're going to, because it helps them feel safe. It helps them feel more secure, to feel, well, familiar. They don't want to open up to the shocking, jarring nature of someone or something different. So we do this so much in our lives. I call it tyranny because it can lead to, certainly, to violent outbursts when we're defending our same ideology, our same religion, our same fashion, what have you. When we defend that at all costs, we can become tyrants, tyrannical. And of
Yes.
course, Nazi Germany, Stalinist Russia,
Yes.
Maoist China, uh, uh, slave-owning America,
Yes.
slaughter of the Native Americans, et cetera. I mean, I think all of these mentalities, and you could describe just about any culture, by the way. I don't mean to pick on one necessarily. I did a book called The Polarized Mind, Why It's Killing Us and What We Can Do About It, where I studied power centers throughout history, going back to Babylon.
Yeah.
And when these countries were sameness striving, to keep their particular view and impose their view on everyone else, we had terrible destruction. And this began from the earliest recorded writings about cultures. It's what the Greeks called hubris,
Yes.
uh,
Yes.
overreaching pride.
Yep.
Uh, and so, of course, that can be extremely tyrannical. I think it's one of the scourges of humanity
Yeah.
and history. And we can do this on individual, as you say, levels, where the
Yeah.
husband and wife has that tyrannical sameness striving,
Right.
or toward the kids, or
Well, and I
within
think even
communities.
like internally with our own sense of, I've talked about how we can get into the habit of almost using anxiety because at least we know how it's going to go down, right? It can be an escape from, well, if I have to feel fear or grief or anger or even annoyance or frustration or something, it's like there's this whole spectrum of human emotions, which can seem a little daunting
Yeah,
to open ourselves up to the whole range and just say, I'm here to feel anything. When
right.
we narrow it down and say, and talk about the tyranny of sameness, right? That it's like, well, I can make anything mean anxiety. I can call all of it anxiety. And if nothing else, I'm familiar enough with it because I know exactly how it's going to go down.
Exactly. I mean, that sameness striving could even be a striving for something that's miserable and oppressive,
Totally.
because
Totally.
that degree of misery and oppression is less daunting than to step out of that
Yes.
realm, because it's familiar and it's, quote, safer in that person's mind than what it would be to break out of those syndromes. We see that all the time in psychotherapy.
Yes.
People who are just wedded to their most miserable circumstances, whether that's oppression by their boss or their spouse or their own minds.
Yep.
It's what they're used to, and they'll
It's what
stick with
they're
it
used to.
as much
And
as they can.
well, you have a great quote in this chapter. You say the desire for sameness can actually be one of the most destructive aspects of being alive.
Yeah,
And again, from that individual, even the internal experience of predictability and familiarity, and just like, let's just do that over and over and over again, to, like you said, this way, way bigger, more global sense of racism and war and just this bad othering,
that's right.
of different cultures and countries and environments. And it can be one of the most destructive aspects of being alive. Being
Yeah,
alive isn't same all the time. That's not
exactly.
it.
Right. Well, it is, unfortunately, for many people, too many people, perhaps. And as a result, I think they're shortchanging
Yes.
a lot of what it could be to be alive.
Yes.
And why shouldn't and couldn't our lives be more like adventures and places for discovery, rather than the extremely well-trodden paths that keep us, quote, safe and secure, but that we're trudging through and going through motions and not really living, because
Yeah.
we're not stepping out of the box.
Because we're not stepping out of the box. And it's, again, this is the part I know it can be like a hard sell.
Well, I
right?
was gonna say, I have a comedy club owning cousin who used to own comedy clubs who used to chide me and say, there ain't no money in anxiety. You get it.
Yeah.
You're running up the wrong hill. But
Yeah. Yeah. And
I'm not after that.
but the real depth and richness and fullness of life is not available to us in the sameness, in the familiarity, and the predictability of just like, let's keep hitting that, the replay button over and over and over again.
Well, that's a huge problem. It's not really very available in our culture. And unfortunately, it's not affordable
Right.
to people too. They don't have the luxury of time or money to engage in more meditative kind of practices, more in-depth, intensive psychotherapy, relational psychotherapy that I believe so many of us really need. I mean, I think that relational part is so important. In fact, I think that's one of our biggest problems today is emotionally impoverished relationships. And
Absolutely.
we desperately need what I would call longer term, in-depth, emotionally restorative relationships especially in underserved communities, marginalized communities, but all over.
Yeah.
We need to make it much more accessible and affordable. And I think it's as important as any major government program we've had in the past, like Works Progress Administration program. It needs to be the equivalent of that.
Yeah. Oh, I couldn't agree with you more that it's wild to me that we teach our kids about my people have heard me say this a million times. We teach our kids about algebra and Shakespeare and, and we leave out, I mean, then there's these whole things, our thoughts, our feelings, our relationships that we're like, I'm sure you'll figure that out on the fly. Good luck to you.
Right.
But that isn't a cornerstone and just pillar of what we're teaching.
Yeah, exactly. Emotional intelligence.
Yes.
Look what we've done to the humanities in the last 60 years.
Yes.
We basically gutted the arts and humanities in primary and secondary schools.
Yeah.
The whole or much of the orientation is not only teach for the test, but it's toward information technology. It's toward very that's where business oriented, I would say,
Yes.
vocational goals. And yes, that has its place. Certainly in our reality, our society, we need to be able to, make a decent living to get along, but something's got to change if we're going to survive, I think, as a species.
Really, I mean, we're killing ourselves, right? By focusing on too much of the other and not prioritizing, and to your point, really making available avenues and resources for all of humanity.
Yes, and helping kids to develop a capacity for uncomfortable situations, uncomfortable conversations. That doesn't mean they have to be demeaning. In fact, they shouldn't be, in my view. They need to be structured and supportive. There need to be guardrails around those kind of conversations.
Yeah,
like we're having with some of these grassroots movements between conservatives and liberals, Braver Angels.
Yes, I'm familiar with Braver Angels. Yes.
And I fostered an approach called the experiential democracy dialogue, which is a one-on-one humanization of dialogue between people of very contrasting background.
Wonderful.
So I think we need those kinds of approaches very early on in schools and homes. But we also need to, I think, develop more tolerance, more spaces for people to, again, work with their anxieties that come up around those difficult issues, the big picture questions. And those have to do with people's individual lives too. What do you really want to do? Who do you really want to be, or what are you becoming? You know, not easy questions. And they require one's whole body experience, not just the head, not just behavior.
Yes. Yeah, we talk a lot about that around here too, of getting out of our head, right? And it's like we live from the neck up. We're
Yes.
very we just glorify thinking and note-taking and consuming and overanalyzing. And it's like getting into our bodies to understand, how's it landing? How is it feeling? What really resonates? What do you want?
Yeah. What really matters.
Right. Yes. And less to do with this. Not that our minds don't come along for the ride. It's all of it.
It's all, yeah.
Yeah.
But we classically, we miss the inner life.
Yes.
We overlook the inner life, the emotions, the body sensations, images, intuitions,
Yes.
imagination. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then as adults, we start really struggling with some of the biggest questions of our lives. You know, how is this relationship going? How do I want to make money? How do I want to parent? And we're like, I have no idea, because I've just been following the steps.
Exactly.
Right? They were all laid out, and I got to the end of that line. Now what?
Yes. We're not equipped for that. We should be much more equipped for that, so that it doesn't land in our laps at 40 or 50 or, you know, God forbid, 70, 80, we suddenly wake up.
Yes.
And what do we do with our lives?
Right. It's so much of what we talk about around here. And I don't think it's any mystery why. I mean, we've explored a lot of here's how we got where we got. And, you know, we're not going to change the whole educational system in one of these conversations, but I do think these conversations, books like what you have written here, are important and instrumental in exploring this and sparking conversations and inquiries with families, with friends, with groups like what I run online, and just getting us to think about this, and people resonate with it. People get it.
I think so. I've been sensing that because people feel anxious a lot. And I think people recognize that there's something important. There's a signal in that anxiety.
Yes.
It's a wake-up call, not just a crippler.
Yes.
And I think people are realizing that, especially through the pandemic, where we've had more time to be with ourselves. In a very challenging way.
Yeah. Well, and it's leveled the playing field in an interesting way. You know, people have had conversations with their boss or with a neighbor or with an extended family member that they never would have had. I remember early in the pandemic talking with the woman at the grocery store who was working behind the deli counter. And both of us just getting teary-eyed, discussing what was happening in the world and our just sheer confusion and fear. And it was like, in a way, there was this really beautiful moment between two people who never would have connected that way otherwise. And my hope is that is one of the things that we take from COVID, is that kind of connection, that kind of awareness.
Yes. It's forced many of us to be more introspective, more reflective.
Yes.
And maybe some of us to have more intimate conversations about what all this is portending for our lives now and moving forward, a chance to take stock.
Absolutely.
So it's very touching what you mentioned with that clerk, I guess, in the store.
Mhm.
One of those moments that you might not have ordinarily had in the day-to-day haste of your lives.
Exactly. Exactly. And there were moments throughout the pandemic where you'd ask somebody, how are you? And they'd say, fine. And it was like, no, you're not. Nobody's fine right now.
That's right.
How
That's
are
right.
you really? And it was because we were collectively experiencing something that nobody on any corner of the planet could escape from.
Yes.
We got to go deeper,
But
right?
you also gave them the opportunity to go deeper instead of just that sameness. You,
Yeah. Yes.
you stepped out of the sameness and you said,
Yeah.
hey, I really want to know how you're doing. I'm not just whimsically asking how you doing just to walk by.
We're not doing the socially acceptable back and forth here, right? I'm really asking.
You're
Yeah.
being present. Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes a big difference. In fact, in some of our psychotherapy trainings, we will repeat the question of how are you?
Yeah.
So you get the first how are you? And I'm doing fine, just had a great day. I was walking at the beach and talking to some friends. Kelly, how are you right now?
Yeah.
They go a little deeper. Well, a little nervous, Now you're asking again, and I'm thinking about it more. And they stop after they talk a little more than again. Kelly, how are you?
Yeah.
So, and it's very striking, moving how deep people can go
Mm-hmm.
as they again stay more present to all that's coming up in that moment. Suddenly
Right.
people will be in tears sometimes,
Oh,
or
sure.
or they'll be in some kind of exuberance.
Yeah.
I'm really doing great. I'm so glad you asked the question in a deeper way. Uh, it's not just that I had a great piece of cake,
Right.
enjoying my life. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. This is great. Well, okay. Remind us again, the name of the book, Life Enhancing Anxiety, Key to a Sane World, comes out February 1st.
Yes, yes.
Please share with the listeners where they can find out more about you. I know you have other books available.
I do. I mean, I think that the easiest way would be to go to my website, which is kirkjschneider.com. I have a lot on there. So,
Yes.
and all of my books, I think 13 or 14, are noted there. There are numerous articles, videos at the website, interviews, etc. I also have quite a listing of videos at YouTube.
Great.
Yeah,
Great.
so a lot available there.
A lot of wonderful resources. And yeah, I will link to all of this in the show notes. And you can find it in the show notes there on the podcast app as well. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciated our engagement here.
Yeah, this was a great conversation. And your book was fascinating. And I really, for those of you who aren't watching the video, I was showing to Dr. Schneider how I tend to read books, which is with my little Post-it flags, and am constantly noting things. And there's quite a few of them in here because there was a lot to think about here, both in my own personal experience with anxiety and how I teach and talk about it in the mindfulness world and with my students. So I'm grateful for your book and for your work, and really for the opportunity to talk today as well. Thank you for your time.
You've been a terrific host and facilitator for this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Do you have someone to help you with your stress, anxiety, worry, and overwhelm? If not, I would love to be your coach. The Fierce Calm Project is my virtual coaching program where we get to go in on topics like this one, and I can help you apply these lessons to your life so that you're creating your own transformation. We do live coaching calls, guided meditations, on-demand yoga classes. We hold book club where we read books your neighborhood book club won't, and there's lots of bonus content that I've created just for you. When you're ready to take what you're learning on the podcast to a whole other level, then come on over and check out the Fierce Calm Project at kellyhanlonmccormick.com/Fierce Calm Project.